Hello everybody and welcome to another Doctor Who review, and this time I'm reviewing a Big Finish audio drama. It's Winter for the Adept. Okay, let's quickly go over the plot line for this review. At a Swiss finishing school for girls, two of them have been left over the Christmas period, Peril and Alison. They seem to have a decent relationship, but Peril's a bit of a rebel and is actually wanting to go and elope with the local constable, Lieutenant Sandoz. Alison initially goes with her, but it's bitterly cold, the snow has cut them all off, and they end up having to get rescued by Sandoz and brought back. Before he finds the girls, he meets up with Nyssa, who has been mysteriously transported from the TARDIS into the middle of nowhere. Nyssa's a little bit annoyed about this, and when they reach the house, they find that the house is actually haunted. Nyssa doesn't believe there's actually such a thing as ghosts or poltergeists, her scientific brain coming through quite prominently, but of course the girls do. The place is run by headmistress Miss Tremaine, who is very religious and very psyched out by all the ghosts and poltergeists that are happening. We also have Mademoiselle Maupassant, who is effectively the second in command. She's one of the teachers and tutors there, who seems to come across as quite friendly and caring for the girls, in contrast to the headmistress, who isn't really caring for them at all, and very old-fashioned with her Christian ways. The Doctor arrives in the attic of the house near the end of episode 1, and immediately starts an investigation about psi capabilities of some of the people. He finds that Alison and Peril both have psi abilities. Alison is telepathic, and Peril is telekinetic. The Doctor is suspicious that there might be something else a little bit more in the background that's causing a problem here, and mentions the name the Spillager. The detector that ended up being teleported to the snow in Switzerland was partially a spillage detector. As the plot goes on, the Doctor finds there's a third link in the psychic chain, a ghost called Harding Wellman, and it's Wellman's memories that cause a smell of flowers to occur, which gives Alison a headache, which then transmits the psi energy to Peril, and Peril then starts moving stuff. Although, once the Doctor has figured out that they're all part of the same link, stuff still moves. And it's found that the Spillagers has been creating a portal this time to come through. The Spillagers are a race who would be able to destroy dimensions if they came through. The Doctor has to try and stop them. He finds that one of the Spillagers for the Scouts is Maupassant. It's later found out that Sandoz is another Scout. Maupassant is killed by a large table which is moved by Harding, Peril and Alison with the Doctor's instructions. And also, Sandoz is killed by an avalanche. The gateway is closed off through a seance, and all of the Spillagers are crushed in that wormhole. Tremaine is killed earlier in the story as she gets more and more frantic in her Christian beliefs, and at one point threatens to kill Peril after she thinks that she is a witch. Harding, Peril, Alison join Nyssa and the Doctor in the TARDIS, but the TARDIS doesn't quite get off the ground properly, and that's how we end the story. So, this is the 10th Big Finish audio drama, and initial impressions don't give a good favourability. When I listened to this the first time, I got the impression that Nyssa was being a bit of a trumped up and annoying teenage type. Then this time round, before I started listening to it, I noticed that it was written by Andrew Cartmel, and of course Andrew Cartmel was part of the Cartmel Master Plan, and one of his most vivid creations was Ace, who's a bolshy teenager. And that's why I had my impression here that Nyssa doesn't really work that well in this story, because she's basically being Ace instead of Nyssa. That's not quite true. There's a bit more nuance to it, and actually Nyssa being a little bit grumpy with the Doctor for most of it is quite understandable, considering she's left in the middle of freezing cold Swiss Alps, and the Doctor really doesn't give a proper apology for it, which kind of makes her a bit bolshy and grumpy, which is a shame. It does, set up the dynamic just a little, but it's not ideal. Overall, it's not a bad little story. I don't mind it. For me, it could be a little bit shorter. I think an hour and a half runtime is even too long for that. If it worked as a two-parter or three-parter, I think it would have been better served. I think there's not much of a plot line here, and you do get the feeling that it's a basic plot line that's been spoon-fed in at various points to give some sort of jeopardy. The cliffhangers aren't the greatest. You've got the ski poles attacking Nyssa in the second episode, which is okay. The Doctor arriving in the TARDIS at the beginning of the first episode is effectively a cliffhanger, which is weird. And then the third episode, you've got effectively another weird cliffhanger. they're not the greatest cliffhangers in the world. It's like they didn't know when to put the cliffhanger in, and it's more to try and get a kind of break in the story to keep this 4-part format. I think a bit of padding could have been taken out. They established pretty well the relationship between Alison and Peril and their side abilities. Could have brought Harding in a little bit quicker. Tremaine could have been nicked off a bit quicker. It could have been more condensed, and I think it would have worked better as a 45-minute to an hour play than actually being a 4-part, 25-minute apiece story, which ends up going a little bit draggy at times. So I think in this one it would have served well to be a little bit shorter. One element I did like about it was Nyssa's lack of local colloquialisms, because they keep going on about that throughout the story, all these different colloquialisms that Alison and Peril and Sandoz make, and she doesn't understand them at all. I think that's quite nice to show that alienness of Nyssa, and that's elements that do work. The Nyssa being out of place and out of time, and that's a running theme we've had in Land of the Dead as well. She had that kind of out of place and wasn't quite sure again, so that's a nice continuity element here. But let's look at each of the characters and just go through them and see what they're like. I'll get some of the main ones done. There's a couple of side characters near the end that I won't mention really, because they've just got very small roles. But we do have the Doctor played by Peter Davison. I don't know what it is at the moment with these stories of the early on with Peter Davison, but he's found his feet by now, and he doesn't seem like he's reading off the page anymore. He seems to have got his character up to scratch. The first couple, he felt like he was reading off the page a little. And don't get me wrong, Peter Davison has had some decent stories so far. Both the ones he's had with Nyssa have not necessarily been the most ideal of stories. It's like the writers aren't quite sure how they're going to pitch and write for Nyssa and Mr. the Doctor at this point. It doesn't seem to feel quite right. The problem with Davison's era is because he's more of a reactive Doctor, when he tries to initiate situation in his earlier parts of his character, it doesn't seem to sit well. Here, he is more reactive and he's a bit stronger for it, but ultimately it doesn't. The Doctor's just plodding along and doing stuff. He's not actually being the cause. He's been investigating. It's interesting enough concept, but it's not wholly engaging for what you've got. Nyssa, by Sarah Sutton, I got the impression the first time I listened to this that she was being a bolshy teenager. And Nyssa effectively is a teenager at this point in her timeline. But there's a bit more nuance to it than I initially got the impression of. You can understand why Nyssa's a little bit off with the Doctor throughout most of it, and her scepticism's there with the ghost side, which is very much in character of Nyssa with analytical thinking. So that part I'm quite okay with, and I understand that. However, it's just the two of them. I mean, obviously the actors are very warm to each other, and you can tell there's a rapport between them in the acting between them. But the actual words and the characterizations that are put down on paper here don't quite fit what I feel Nyssa and the Doctor should be. There is a more of a platonic situation between Nyssa and the Doctor than you get here, and the element of Nyssa being a little bit grumpy that seems a bit out of character. It doesn't seem to fit well for me, and I think that's probably one of the biggest flaws of this story, is this relationship between the Doctor and the companion isn't quite what you would expect, or certainly what I would expect from those two. I mean, Peter Davison can work with his companions. Mark Strickson, when he did the one in Phantasmagoria with him, is actually pretty well produced. The fact that the Doctor is pretty much willing to let Turlough go off his own accord and do stuff is nice, and it helps develop Turlough's character. Perry in Red Dawn, Perry is very much independent as well. Those sort of scripts where the Doctor lets his companion shine seem to work well with Peter Davison's Doctor, because it allows them to go elsewhere. Ones where the companion follows, at the moment, they don't seem to have managed to get that working, and they do fix that later, because Nyssa then gets her own stories and follows her own leads. But when she's not following her own leads, and she does to a small extent Land of the Dead, but when she's kind of following along, she's really questioning part of this story. She's like, what are we doing, Doctor? Why are we doing, Doctor? It doesn't seem to work as well for Nyssa as a character, and it doesn't bounce off as well with the Fifth Doctor, which is really, really sad. I mean, it's still okay. It's not massive heights, and you do wonder at this stage why Peter Davison and Sarah Sutton have got one of the longest partnerships on the audio ventures of Big Finish, apart from Sylvester McCoy and Sophie Aldred. You wonder why they have such a good partnership. And it's obvious that the two actors like working with each other, but to be fair, these stories with Nyssa on her own at the moment aren't really grabbing too much of my attention. You then have the guest cast, Liz Sutherland, who plays Alison Spear. Alison is one of the finishing school girls. She's portrayed as a 16-year-old, and it's her diary that we're reciting the adventure from, because it opens with Alison writing an entry in her book that she's talking about, her adventures back in the finishing school in the 1960s. It's never established when it was. The plot synopsis says 1963. I don't know when it was exactly, but it does give the impression of maybe that time period as when it was. They're talking about helicopters, but they're still using radios for communications. So it makes you think it's probably 60s, 70s, maybe something like that. You're never entirely sure what period we're talking about here because it's not made specifically clear in this one. Well, Sutherland does a decent job though as Allison, the inquisitive and really wanting to get in and explore, and is really querying and kind of accepts her situation rather quickly and gets on with it. It's really nice to see. And yeah, I quite like the way Allison's played here. It's quite sweet. It's not so much a plot point. She does have some good points about the fact that she's really intrigued. She's always asking questions. She's effectively a better companion here than in some respects than Nyssa in this one, which is interesting in itself. However, it's still played quite well and quite fun, and I do like it. You've then got Sally Faulkner playing Miss Tremaine, very much in the thing of a God-fearing woman, headmistress, very much in the vein of the character in Curse of Fenric. It's a natural enough plot. She goes a bit mad as she finds out more information about the background between Peril and Allison, accuses Peril of being a witch and wants to kill her and stab her, and then doesn't like the Doctor interfering either and wants to kill him, and, you know, that kind of religious zeal that she has certainly is a natural plot point and is played well enough by Sally Faulkner, but it's kind of one-dimensional a little bit. The one character who is played without much nuance to them is Maupassant, played by Hannah Dixon. She's a sweet little second-in-command teacher, tutor, that's in the school, kind of defending her mistress, her head mistress, Miss Tremaine, a little bit, but also seems to be a bit more polite and kind to the girls who have been left over Christmas because the parents wouldn't pick them up. It's quite interesting and quite intriguing how that all works, and it's really strange and weird how that all comes out. But yeah, there's not much to her, and the kind of twist at the end that she's one of the Spillagers is an interesting twist, but it's not justified. It just doesn't seem justified to me, and it doesn't seem quite right. There's a sense that, oh, it's a lovely little French woman. Oh, right, okay. Oh, that's weird. It doesn't seem to come across as justifiable, a plot point, a plot twist, with Maupassant being a Spillager. It's played fine by Hannah Dickinson, but she's not got much to get her teeth into. We've then got a name that will become more regular in a very few audio dramas' time. India Fisher makes her first appearance in Doctor Who audios, playing Peril Bellamy. It seems to be the case that prospective new companions of the Doctors have an initial role elsewhere before they come into the main canon completely. Again, there seems to be a gap of about 5 or 6 stories between their first appearance and their actual introduction as a companion. Maggie Stables was in the very first one, Signs of Time, has a very small role, and then becomes evil, and India Fisher has the same treatment. She turns up in a few stories' time in Storm Warning. It's really quite interesting how that all works. India Fisher plays Peril here, and she's got a bigger role than Maggie Stables did before she came in properly as a companion. And it's interesting having this precocious 19-year-old wanting to elope with the local lieutenant Sandors. It's very much a kind of adventurous kind of, not quite Edwardian adventurous, but she's playing that kind of upper-class kind of rebel. And it's like the groundwork for Charlie Pollard to an extent. So it's interesting seeing it, hearing it. It's played pretty well. Peril is an interesting character. The fact that she's kind of lashing out because she knows she's different, and she knows that she's got this psi ability. She calls it a family trait called the Adept, which I think is an interesting concept. And the fact that her telekinetic powers, of course, some of the poltergeist events, but not all of them, is really an interesting way of showing that she's one of the keys to the Spillagers coming through. And I think it's an interesting little turn, and I think it works quite well. And you can see why India Fisher is considered for a new companion role not far in the future. It's very soon that we're going to have, of course, India Fisher becoming the new companion for the 8th Doctor and the start of the 8th Doctor adventures. And yeah, India Fisher plays it solidly enough, this role of Peril Bellamy, and it's really enjoyable to listen to. I'll come back to Sandors in a minute. One more character I want to mention is Christopher Webber playing Harding Wellman. It's interesting having a talking ghost. It isn't realised 100% well here because you've just got a voice. I suppose in some respects it does work better for audio because you've got that kind of disposition, but he just sounds like another voice. There's no effect on it or anything like that. They've just made it very much, he's just a voice in the ether. There's not any ethereal tone to the timbre of the voice or anything like that. It's not been treated. It's just him talking. The character himself is interesting. This guy died in an avalanche in the early 20th century and has basically been haunting the place ever since. Is an interesting focal point, and it's the fact that he is the catalyst for Allison, who's then the catalyst for Peril, is an interesting concept. The character as well is played well enough. There's not much there for Christopher Webber to work with, to be fair, and that's the nature of most of these characters. They've kind of got basic characterizations to go by, and they don't really develop much further than that. And yes, I know most audio dramas really do have plot points, but they do kind of develop them a little bit more with the characters they do have as time goes on through the audio dramas. But at the moment, it's a little bit more basic plotting in it, and Harding is another one of them. It's not terrible. It's certainly a good little role, but it's only like another piece in the puzzle, effectively. He doesn't have much more development apart from that. Then the best guest cast member, I think, is probably Peter Jurasik as Lieutenant Sandoz. He comes across as this gruff detective who's of the area, who is really looking for their help and trying to get these girls away, and he has the helicopter being called to get them away, which is then promptly destroyed. I don't understand, through the psi energy issues that we're having. The fact that he's a bit sceptical throughout of it, he doesn't like the Doctor interfering, he thinks the Doctor's interfering with the plans a bit too much. You think it's just because he doesn't like the Doctor's authority, but actually there's a bit more to it at the end, and he is the twist that I think is more justifiable of being a spillager at the end, because there is something about the character that makes you think there's more to him than just being a grumpy constable. He is the role which I think is more suited, turning into the spillager, and it's more satisfying when that happens. Peter Jurasik, of course, is best known for playing Lando Mollari in Babylon 5, and his kind of tone he has with his accent is still there, and it gives a kind of unearthly quality to the way he plays it, just a little bit. So it gives you a hint all the way through. It's very well pitched, it's very well played, and I think he's the strongest of the guest cast here. He makes for a good appearance and gives you someone the Doctor can butt heads against quite well, and I think it works for that. Then we've got the writing by Andrew Cartmel. I mean, the plotting's okay, but it does seem to be a bit more of a paint-by-numbers type plot. You've got, there's a situation. You're in a haunted house. This is the reason for the haunted house. No, it's not. Right, okay, it's this instead. No, it may not be this. It might be this a little bit more. No, it actually is a gateway to an alien thing that the Doctor's mentioned earlier on. This kind of twisting plot line doesn't quite work. I'm just wondering if maybe Andrew Cartmel had originally written this for the 7th Doctor, because it does seem to have vibes of a kind of 7th Doctor-ish story more than a 5th Doctor story. It just doesn't seem to suit the 5th Doctor as well as it could do for the plot line. It just doesn't sit quite right for me, and it has knocked down the rating a little bit because of that. I mean, overall, it's enjoyable to listen to, and I would listen to it again, but it isn't the first pick. I was going to be a nicknamer saying this story is called Winter for the Inept, but that's a little bit harsh, I think. A Winter for the Adept is about right, and he's fairly adept at writing it, but it's not box office. It does seem to be lacking something a little bit. I mean, it's directed fine by Gary Russell. It seems to be basic direction here. There's not much really in the atmospheric side. It's more through what they're talking about. You don't really get much of the atmospheric there to make it more believable. It's kind of like a real world version of Ghosts. You get the sound effects of things moving, and you get the reactions to them, but you don't get any kind of sci-fi ethereal feel. And I think that probably does work better with the way the direction is done for that, because it gives a bit more realism. There's something off with the way it's been directed, and I'm not quite sure what it is. I can't put my finger on it. It's quite strange. The music by Russell Stone complements what it needs to. It's ineffectual, it doesn't affect the plot, it doesn't overpower the plot, although I think the scoring is more akin to what you'd get in the late 80s than the early 80s. I'm not saying this needs a kind of Roger Limb type heavy synth, but if it had a style similar to Paddy Kingsland or Peter Howell, it probably would work more in giving the feeling of that type of era. But I understand, obviously, they're trying to get away from that a little bit and trying to expand the soundscape a bit more. But these early adventures do tend to have a kind of sound to them based on the era the Doctor has come from, which is interesting. And this is maybe the first of them trying to get away from that a little bit and have a bit more of a musical score. It's fine by Russell Stone, but it's nothing to shout home about, really. But overall, it's all right. It's not the greatest story in the world. It's okay, there's a nice premise with the poltergeist, and it's fairly well realised for audio. As I say, it's maybe a little too long, even at 1.5 hours, and therefore I'm only going to give it 3 TARDISes out of 5. Okay, let's see how Winter for the Adept sits in with the rest of the audio adventures that I have reviewed so far. Winter for the Adept sits in with The Land of the Dead with 3 TARDISes out of 5. Then at the top we have The Genocide Machine and The Spectre of Lanyon Moor with 4 TARDISes out of 5. The rest of the Big Finish adventures are currently all sitting within 3.5 TARDISes out of 5, and of course they are The Sirens of Time, Phantasmagoria, The Whispers of Terror, The Fearmonger, The Marian Conspiracy, and Red Dawn. Thank you guys for watching and listening to this Big Finish audio review. I am back on Sunday with a Kidstructor. Hopefully you can join me for that at 4 PM GMT. What do you think of Winter of the Adept? Leave a comment down below. Do you like it? Leave a comment down below. Do you not like it? Leave a comment down below. And if you like this video, please don't forget to like it. Please share it with the hashtag teamstructor. And if you like the channel as a whole, you can hit that subscribe button and the notifications bell so you know when a new video comes out. General rule, new video every Sunday at 4 PM GMT. If you want to help support the channel more, you can go to the Patreon at patreon.com/Deanstructor. For as little as £1 a month, you can help support the channel. That gives you a name check. £2.50 a month allows you to get videos in advance. And then £4 a month allows you to get extra videos that aren't available anywhere else. They're only available on Patreon. There are 4 Kidstructors in the moment, but one of those Kidstructors is available to all Patreon levels until the 28th of February. That's the extended version of the Frosty the Snowman reaction from the Kidstructor series that was released on the 25th of December 2022. You've got until the end of February to be able to see that for only £1 at patreon.com/Deanstructor. That's it from me. Thank you once again guys for watching and listening, and you know what? I'll see you later.